It was a Friday night, and I was too tired to cook after a long week at work. I decided to order a pizza from my favorite local place. I'd used the delivery app so many times before that it felt routine, but that night, something felt off right from the start. The delivery guy arrived faster than usual, which should have been a good thing, but when I opened the door, I was immediately hit by an overwhelming, foul odor. It was like the smell of death. Something I couldn't place exactly, but was enough to make me regret ordering food in the first place. The guy stood there in a red delivery outfit and hat, his face shadowed so deeply by the hat that I could barely see his features. What little I could see was unsettling. His skin was dark and pale at the same time, like he hadn't seen daylight in years. The vibe he gave off was beyond creepy. I just wanted the transaction to be over, so I quickly handed him the money, noted his name and car number plate from the app, and shut the door, locking it immediately. I set the pizza box down on the kitchen counter and noticed it felt unusually heavy. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I was just imagining things because of how weird the delivery guy was. I grabbed a plate, ready to dig in, hoping to forget about the whole encounter. But when I opened the box, my stomach turned. Inside were small pieces of what looked like human flesh. I saw what seemed to be an eye and something that looked like an ear. The smell hit me again, stronger this time, making my head spin. It was disgusting, terrifying, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. Panicking, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. As I explained what I saw, I could barely keep my voice steady. I ran to the bathroom, vomiting while trying to keep the dispatcher on the line. I told them everything, the name and car number plate of the delivery guy, the grotesque contents of the pizza box. They assured me help was on the way. I pulled myself together enough to leave the bathroom and move back to the kitchen. I wanted to get that box as far away from me as possible, but when I glanced out the window, I saw him. The delivery guy was standing there, watching me with a blank expression, like he was enjoying my horror. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually the police arrived and took him away. They found out he had been doing this as a twisted hobby, kidnapping people, killing them, and using their flesh to make pizzas. When they questioned him, he barely said a word. All he mentioned was how much he enjoyed listening to his victims scream. I was lucky that night. Lucky I wasn't one of his victims. The memory of that night still haunts me. I can't forget the smell, the sight of the flesh in the pizza box, and the way he watched me from the window. Every time I think about ordering food, I remember that face and the smell of death. It's a nightmare I can't escape. I never thought being a pizza delivery guy would lead to anything more exciting than getting a few bucks in tips and maybe the occasional free slice. It was a Friday night, the kind where every other order was for a large pepperoni with extra cheese. I was on my usual route, making deliveries around the neighborhood, trying to stay out of the rain. It was getting close to midnight, and I had one last delivery to make. The order came from a house I'd never been to before, which was weird because I thought I knew all the regulars. Anyway, I punched the address into my GPS and drove off, hoping to get back to the store before closing. The house was in a part of town I didn't usually go to. It was an older neighborhood with narrow streets and houses set far back from the road. The kind of place that gave you the creeps if you thought about it too much. I pulled up to the address, double-checked it on my phone, and got out of the car, pizza in hand. The house itself looked pretty normal from the outside, a little rundown maybe, but nothing too unusual. There were no lights on, which I found odd, but sometimes people forget. I walked up the path to the front door, the smell of the pizza mixing with the damp night air. As I got closer, I noticed the mail slot in the door. It was one of those old-fashioned ones with a brass flap. Something was hanging out of it. At first, I thought it was a prank. Maybe someone had left a rubber finger or something stupid like that. But as I got closer, I realized it was real. There was a finger hanging out of the mail slot, a sticky note attached to it. I froze, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. The note read, "Money is under the doormat. Here's your tip." I felt like I was going to be sick. I dropped the pizza, my hands shaking. I backed away from the door, looking around to see if anyone was watching. The street was empty, and the house next door was dark. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, trying to keep my voice steady as I explained what I had found. The operator told me to stay where I was and wait for the police. I stood there in the rain, my heart pounding, staring at that damn finger. It felt like hours before I heard the sirens. A patrol car pulled up, and 2 officers got out, their faces grim. They took my statement, asking me the same questions over and over. Did I see anyone around? Did I touch anything? Could I identify the finger? I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. They taped off the area and called for backup. Before long, there were more police cars, and an ambulance showed up. One of the officers pulled me aside and asked if I wanted to call my manager. I didn't, but I knew I had to. I dialed the number and waited for him to pick up. When he did, he sounded annoyed. "Where the hell are you? We close in 10 minutes, he barked. I took a deep breath and tried to explain what had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You didn't leave the pizza," he finally said. "Are you serious?" I shouted. "There's a finger hanging out of the mail slot. The police are here." "I don't care about that," he snapped. "You need to leave the pizza and get the money. That's your job." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I hung up, feeling more furious than scared now. One of the officers came over and asked if I was okay. I told him about the call, and he just shook his head. The police took the finger and the note as evidence. They searched the house and found more disturbing things inside, but they wouldn't tell me what. They took my contact information and told me they might need to follow up with more questions. I just nodded, still in shock. When I finally got back to the store, my manager was waiting for me. He started to yell, but I cut him off. I told him I quit, threw my hat on the counter, and walked out. I didn't care about the job anymore. I just wanted to forget what I'd seen. The next day, the story was all over the news. They found the rest of the body in the house. It was the homeowner, an older man who lived alone. The police were looking for suspects, but they didn't have any leads yet. My phone kept ringing with reporters wanting to talk to me, but I ignored them all. It's been a few weeks now, and I still can't get that image out of my head. Every time I close my eyes, I see that finger in the note. I don't think I'll ever be able to deliver pizzas again. I'm just trying to move on, but it's hard. People say time heals all wounds, but some things you just can't unsee. A few days ago, I got a call from one of the officers who was at the scene. They had a suspect in custody and wanted me to come in for a lineup. I agreed, hoping this might bring some closure. When I got to the station, they led me to a room with a one-way mirror. I watched as they brought in a line of men, all looking rough and nervous. I scanned their faces, my heart racing. None of them looked familiar, but there was something about the third guy that made my skin crawl. I pointed him out, and the officer nodded, writing something down. Afterwards, the officer told me they had enough evidence to charge the guy. He had been targeting delivery drivers, using the tips as bait. I felt a weird mix of relief and anger. At least they caught him, but it didn't make what happened any less horrifying. I've been trying to move on, finding a new job and focusing on other things, but every now and then I think about that night and the finger in the mail slot. It's a reminder that you never really know what's waiting for you behind the next door. I deliver pizzas. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills, and sometimes you get to meet interesting people. Most of the time, it's just dropping off a pizza, getting a tip, and moving on to the next house. But one night, it was different. One night, it was terrifying. It started like any other Friday night. Busy, lots of orders, and me, driving around town trying to keep up with the rush. It was around 9 p.m. when I got the order. The address was a little out of the way, but nothing too strange. A large pepperoni and a bottle of soda. Simple enough. I drove out to the house, which was on a quiet, dimly lit street. The kind of street where the houses are a bit farther apart, and there's not much going on after dark. I pulled up to the house, grabbed the pizza and soda, and walked up to the door. As I was about to knock, the door swung open. There stood two men, both around 5'5", Latino, with hard, cold expressions. One of them had what looked like a Colt in his hand, pointing it right at me. My heart stopped. "Get in," the one with the gun barked. I didn't have a choice. I stepped inside, and before I knew it, they grabbed me and pulled me through the door. I was on the parlor room floor in an instant. They started beating me, fists flying, feet kicking. I tried to cover my head, but they were relentless. I could feel the pain in every part of my body. My nose was bleeding, my ribs felt like they were on fire, and I could taste blood in my mouth. One of them, the one without the gun, started going through my pockets. He found my wallet and took all the cash. It wasn't much, maybe $50, but it was all I had. He also took my phone and threw it across the room, shattering it against the wall. Then they started talking. "You tell anyone about this, we'll kill you and your family," the guy with the gun said. His voice was calm, almost too calm, like he had done this before, and he wasn't worried about the consequences. I nodded, barely able to see through the blood and tears. I was terrified. I had never been this scared in my life. They pushed me back through the door, shoving me onto the porch. "And don't come back," the other guy said. Then they slammed the door shut. I stumbled to my car, barely able to walk. I got in and just sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to process what had just happened. I wanted to call the police, but my phone was destroyed, and I was too scared to go back to the house and ask for help. I drove back to the pizza place, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I got there, my manager saw the state I was in and called the police. I told them everything, even though I was scared. They assured me they would handle it. A few days later, they caught the two guys. Turns out, one of them had a record, and this was his third strike. He got life in prison. The other guy got 5 years. It's been a few months since it happened, but I still think about it all the time. Every time I deliver a pizza, I get a little nervous. I can't help it. I guess that's just the way it is now. I've been delivering pizzas for about 3 years now. Most nights are pretty normal. You get the occasional weird customer, but nothing too crazy. That all changed one night when I got a delivery to a hospital. It was a late shift, around 11 p.m., and I had one last order to drop off before I could call it a night. The order came through the app with specific instructions on which door to use and where to go once inside. The hospital was pretty quiet when I got there. The main entrance was closed for the night, so I had to use the side entrance like the instructions said. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped into a dimly lit hallway. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed and flickered, casting weird shadows on the walls. It was kind of eerie, but I figured hospitals at night are just like that. I followed the signs to the check-in desk, but when I got there, no one was around. The desk was empty, and there wasn't a single person in sight. I glanced around, feeling a bit uneasy. Behind the desk were several recovery rooms, all with their lights out. I tried calling out, "Hello, I have a delivery," but my voice just echoed down the empty hallway. I waited at the desk for a few minutes, hoping someone would show up. The whole place was dead silent, except for the occasional beep of a distant machine. I checked my phone to make sure I was at the right spot. Yep, this was it. I couldn't just leave the pizza there, so I decided to hang out for a bit longer. As I stood there, I heard a faint noise coming from one of the rooms behind me. It was a sad, weak voice, almost a whisper. "I just want to go home." The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I turned around slowly and saw a man lying in a bed in the room directly to my right. He had several tubes in and out of him, and his lamp was faintly lit, casting a dim glow over his pale face. His eyes were locked onto mine, and it felt like he was staring straight into my soul. Before I could react, the person who had ordered the pizza finally showed up at the desk. She was a nurse, looking a bit harried and out of breath. We did the little pizza exchange. She handed me the money. I gave her the pizza. I tried to ask her about the man in the room, but she seemed in a hurry and brushed me off with a quick, "Thanks, have a good night." As she walked away, I turned back to look into the room where the man had been. My heart skipped a beat. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the lamp was off, and there were no tubes, no machines, nothing. It was like no one had ever been there. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I'd seen someone there. I wasn't imagining it. To make sure I wasn't going crazy, I pretended to forget where the exit was, and took another look into a few of the other rooms. They were all empty too. The hospital felt like a ghost town. I left the hospital feeling shaken and a bit freaked out. I couldn't shake the image of the man's sad eyes and his desperate voice. It was like he was reaching out to me for help, but when I turned around, he was just gone. I don't know what happened that night. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, or maybe I was more tired than I realized. But every time I think about it, I get this uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I've delivered to that hospital a few times since then, but I always make sure to drop off the pizza and get out of there as fast as I can. It still freaks me out.